June 16, 1941, Davisville, Rhode Island. The summer breeze carried the rhythmic clanging of metal and shouted orders across the newly established Naval Construction Battalion Center. Lieutenant Commander James Ford watched as civilian engineers huddled around blueprints, their faces etched with determination as they raced against an impossible deadline. In just 60 days, they were expected to design and prototype a revolutionary portable structure that could be shipped anywhere in the world and assembled by untrained men in hours, not weeks. They believed they were simply creating temporary housing. None of them realized they were about to change the course of the war. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the untold story of how a handful of American engineers transformed curved sheets of corrugated steel into one of the most versatile military structures ever created, and how these humble Quonset huts would ultimately become symbols of industrial might that broke the psychological backbone of Axis forces from the Pacific to North Africa. Peter de Jong, head engineer at the George A. Fuller Construction Company, unrolled the preliminary sketches across the makeshift conference table. At 52, with receding grey hair and spectacles that never seemed to sit straight on his nose, de Jong had built everything from Manhattan skyscrapers to bridges in rural Kentucky. But nothing had prepared him for this challenge. "Gentlemen, the Navy needs 200 of these structures, and they need the first ones in 8 weeks, de Jong announced to his team of 7 engineers. They must be lightweight enough to ship anywhere, strong enough to withstand Arctic blizzards and tropical typhoons, and simple enough for a handful of sailors to assemble with basic tools." Otto Brandenberger, the youngest of the team at just 29, raised an eyebrow. 8 weeks to design, test, and begin mass production. That's impossible, sir. The word impossible has been temporarily removed from the American vocabulary, Mr. Brandenberger, de Jong replied with a tight smile. The British have a similar design called a Nissen hut from the Great War. We're to improve upon it significantly. Captain Raymond V. Gilman, the Navy liaison assigned to the project, stepped forward. His starched uniform contrasted sharply with the rumpled appearance of the civilian engineers. "Gentlemen, right now our forces are operating from tents in places like Iceland, where winds reach over 100 miles per hour. In the Pacific, our men are sleeping in mud during monsoon season. Every day we delay costs lives." The pressure was immense. The Fuller Company had been given a $1.2 million contract, equivalent to over $22 million today, to design and produce thousands of prefabricated buildings that could be shipped in pieces and quickly assembled anywhere from the Arctic Circle to equatorial jungles. 3 days later, the team had settled on a basic design, a semicircular structure made of corrugated steel sheets mounted on a wood frame, with a 16-foot width and 36-foot length. The name Quonset was chosen after the location of the Naval Construction Center in Quonset Point, Rhode Island. By the end of the first week, they had their first prototype. It was crude, drafty, and leaked during the first rainstorm. De Jong was undeterred. "Double the thickness of the steel at the seams," he ordered. "And we need better insulation, something lightweight but effective." Brandenberger had an idea. "What about that new masonite material with a layer of insulation between interior and exterior surfaces?" The team worked around the clock, sleeping on cots in the same warehouse where they were building their prototypes. By day 20, they had their first viable model. But a significant problem remained: condensation. In humid conditions, water collected inside the curved ceiling and dripped onto everything below. Simon Levine, the materials specialist, proposed a solution: a layer of waterproof paper between the insulation and the steel. This simple addition solved the condensation issue, demonstrating the pragmatic ingenuity that would characterize the entire project. Captain Gilman brought unwelcome news on day 35. The Navy's requirements have changed. We need these huts to serve not just as barracks, but as hospitals, mess halls, bakeries, and ammunition storage. Can your design be modified? De Jong removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. We'll need to create specialized end sections for different purposes, but the basic structure will remain the same. This modular approach would prove to be one of the Quonset hut's greatest strengths. By the end of the 8-week deadline, the team had not only finalized their design, but had overseen the production of the first 100 huts. The Navy was impressed, but the real test would come when these structures were deployed to the field. The Pacific Theater, October 1941. Marine Sergeant William Bill Harrison wiped sweat from his brow as he supervised the construction of the first Quonset hut on the island of Tutuila in American Samoa. The temperature hovered at 92 degrees with humidity to match, and his uniform clung to him like a second skin. "All right, men, let's see if these instructions are as simple as they claim," Harrison said, unfolding a well-worn paper. 4 men, 4 hours. That's what they promised back in Rhode Island. Corporal James Murphy, a former construction worker from Chicago, snorted, "Nothing's ever that easy, Sarge." Harrison's team of 6 Marines had received a shipment containing all the components for 2 standard Quonset huts: curved ribs, corrugated steel sheets, wooden floor sections, insulation, doors, and windows, along with basic tools and illustrated instruction manuals. "Start with the wooden deck foundation," Harrison read. The men laid out the wooden floor sections, bolting them together on a hastily leveled patch of ground. Next came the steel ribs, forming the distinctive half-cylinder shape. To everyone's surprise, the components fit together precisely. The detailed simplicity of the design became apparent as they worked. There were no complex joints or specialized parts. Everything was designed to be interchangeable and foolproof. "This is actually making sense," Murphy admitted 3 hours later as they attached the last of the corrugated steel panels to the frame. "It's like a giant erector set." Private First Class Robert Chen, who stood at just 5'6", discovered he could single-handedly lift the lightweight components. "The engineers really thought this through. Even someone my size can handle these parts." By sunset, the first hut stood complete, taking just under 5 hours to assemble. As the Marines stepped back to admire their work, a sudden tropical downpour began. They hurried inside their new structure and listened to the rain drumming on the metal roof. "Dry as a bone in here," Harrison noted with satisfaction. "Let's see a canvas tent manage that." "Deal." The second hut went up the next morning in just 3 hours. Word spread quickly through the Pacific bases about these remarkable structures. What most impressed the troops was how cool the huts remained in the tropical heat when properly ventilated, and how they stood firm even in strong winds that would have shredded the canvas tents they were accustomed to. Back in Rhode Island, production was ramping up at an astonishing pace. The original contract for 8 200 huts had been just the beginning. By December 1941, the Fuller Company was producing 20 complete Quonset huts per day. After Pearl Harbor and America's entry into the war, that number would climb to 150 daily. Commander Jack Perry oversaw the logistical operation that distributed these huts worldwide. His office walls were covered with maps showing shipping routes and deployment locations. "The beauty of these structures is in the shipping efficiency," Perry explained to visiting War Department officials. "A standard 16x36-foot Quonset hut breaks down into a package measuring approximately 350 cubic feet and weighing about 4 tons. That means we can fit the components for nearly 35 complete huts into the cargo hold of a single Liberty ship." The officials were impressed by the numbers, but Perry had more to show them. "We're not just shipping housing, we're shipping hospitals, command centers, repair shops, and mess halls. Each specialized Quonset can be assembled by the same basic principles. The statistics were staggering. By mid-1942, American factories were producing over 25 Zeuzozeren Quonset huts annually. For every one Zeuzozeren troops deployed overseas, approximately 15 Quonset huts of various configurations were shipped. The logistics were precise. Each battalion received huts proportioned to their specific needs, with appropriate modifications for their climate zone. Across the Atlantic, the war was taking a different turn. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Matthews of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers arrived in North Africa in November 1942 as part of Operation Torch. His mission: establish forward bases that could support the Allied push against Rommel's forces. Matthews had at his disposal components for 250 Quonset huts, along with teams of engineers and local laborers. As the first structures rose from the desert sand near Casablanca, captured German soldiers watched in disbelief. Oberleutnant, First Lieutenant, Karl Weber of the Afrika Korps was among the prisoners tasked with assisting in the construction. An architect before the war, Weber was fascinated by the efficiency of the design. "How many of these structures do you have?" Weber asked Matthews through an interpreter. "As many as we need," Matthews replied simply. The truth was even more impressive than Matthews let on. By this point in the war, American factories had produced over 32 Zeuzozeren Quonset huts, and the number was growing daily. For the Germans, who were struggling with critical material shortages and bombing of their industrial centers, this casual display of industrial might was demoralizing. Weber made notes in his journal that night. "The Americans build in days what would take us weeks. Their supply lines stretch across oceans, yet they seem to have limitless materials. Their Quonset structures appear simple, yet they are ingeniously designed for maximum efficiency and strength. One must wonder how long we can compete against such productivity." This psychological impact was not limited to North Africa. As Allied forces advanced through Italy in 1943, the rapid establishment of forward bases using Quonset huts created a vivid contrast to the increasingly desperate material situation of Axis forces. As the war progressed, the Quonset design continued to evolve. The original 16x36-foot model was joined by a 28-48-foot version for larger applications and a smaller 16-20-foot variant for specialized uses or tight spaces. Engineers developed modified end sections for specific functions, reinforced walls for ammunition storage, specialized ventilation for field hospitals, and insulated designs for Arctic deployments. In the Aleutian Islands, Navy Seabees faced the ultimate test of the Quonset design. With winds regularly exceeding 100 mm and temperatures dropping well below zero, standard military tents had proven useless. Chief Petty Officer Howard Granville led a Seabee unit tasked with establishing a base on a Dak island. "We anchored those huts like they were ships at sea," Granville later recorded in his official report. Concrete foundations, double-bolted connections, and additional external cable tie-downs. When a storm hit with 120 mm gusts on January 18, 1943, we lost antennas, equipment, and even some vehicles, but every single Quonset remained intact. The versatility of the Quonset hut was nowhere more evident than in their use as field hospitals. Captain Eleanor Hayes, an Army nurse stationed in New Guinea, described the transformation in a letter home. "The medical Quonsets are remarkable. The curved interior allows for efficient use of space, with beds along both walls and a central aisle for staff. The specialized ventilation systems help control tropical infections, and the insulated walls keep the interior cool enough for surgery, even in this oppressive heat. Before these arrived, we were losing patients simply due to the poor conditions of our tent hospitals." Production innovations continued on the home front. By mid-1943, the original wood-frame design had been replaced with an all-steel version that reduced both weight and assembly time. The Strand Steel Corporation, which had taken over much of the production from Fuller, developed a patented nailing groove that allowed wooden interior elements to be attached directly to the steel ribs, eliminating the need for specialized fasteners. The staggering scale of production created its own challenges. At peak capacity, American factories were producing components for nearly 40 Quonset huts monthly, requiring over 35 tons of steel, 5 million board feet of lumber, and 750 square yards of insulation material. Admiral Ben Morrison, who oversaw Navy construction in the Pacific, put these numbers in perspective. Every month, we're shipping enough Quonset components to create a city that can house 120,000 personnel, complete with hospitals, mess halls, command centers and workshops. The entire operation, from factory to field assembly, requires fewer man-hours than conventional construction would demand for a fraction of the capacity. As Allied forces island-hopped across the Pacific in 1944, the psychological impact of Quonset huts became increasingly significant. Japanese defenders on recently captured islands were often startled by how quickly substantial American bases appeared, seemingly overnight. Lieutenant Hiroshi Watanabe, captured after the Battle of Saipan, described this effect in his interrogation. "We expected the Americans would need weeks to establish proper bases. Instead, within days of securing an area, they had constructed permanent-looking facilities. The speed with which they transformed jungle into a functioning military base was demoralizing to our forces." This rapid transformation of landscape became a hallmark of American military advance. In Europe, as Allied forces pushed into France after D-Day, Quonset-based forward operating bases followed closely behind the front lines. Major General Leonard T. Gero of V Corps noted, "Our ability to establish proper command, medical and supply facilities within hours of securing an area has been crucial to maintaining our momentum." Back in Rhode Island, the original engineering team led by Peter de Jong was called together for a special briefing in August 1944. Captain Raymond Gilman, now promoted to Rear Admiral, presented them with remarkable statistics. "Gentlemen, the structures you designed 3 years ago have now been deployed on every continent," Gilman announced. "Production has exceeded 170,000 units, with current rates at approximately 20,000 monthly. Your design has been adapted into more than 40 specialized configurations, from cold storage facilities to aircraft maintenance hangars." Otto Brandenberger, who had doubted the possibility of the original 8-week deadline, shook his head in amazement. "And to think we almost told you it couldn't be done." Admiral Gilman nodded. "Your work has saved countless lives, not just by providing shelter, but by enabling the rapid establishment of field hospitals, secure command posts, and proper storage for perishable supplies. The Quonset hut has become as essential to our war effort as any weapon system." Simon Levine, the materials specialist who had solved the condensation problem, asked a question that had been bothering him. "Sir, we designed these as temporary structures. What's the typical lifespan in field conditions?" "That's the most remarkable part," Gilman replied. "We expected perhaps 6 months in harsh environments before significant deterioration. Instead, we're seeing Quonset still fully functional after 2 years in the Pacific, with minimal maintenance. Your temporary solution has proven remarkably permanent. Indeed, this permanence would become one of the most significant legacies of the Quonset hut." As 1945 approached and the outcome of the war seemed increasingly clear, military planners began considering the post-war uses of these structures. Marine Sergeant William Harrison, now stationed on Okinawa, had developed a personal connection to these curved steel shelters. He had lived in Quonset huts on 4 different islands across the Pacific campaign. "They don't look like much from the outside," he told a war correspondent, But there's something comforting about that curved ceiling and the sound of rain on the steel. No matter where we've been deployed, stepping into a Quonset feels a little bit like coming home. This sentiment was echoed by thousands of service members. The distinctive silhouette of the Quonset hut had become a symbol of American presence, and for many communities being liberated from Axis occupation, a symbol of hope and security. As Allied forces advanced into Germany in early 1945, the contrast between German and American logistics became starkly apparent. Oberleutnant Karl Weber, who had first encountered Quonset huts in North Africa, was now working as a translator for American forces. In his journal, he reflected on this difference. The German war machine, for all its initial advantages in strategy and tactics, was ultimately overwhelmed by American industrial capacity. Their Quonset bases stand as perfect symbols of this disparity, mass-produced, efficiently designed, and deployed with an abundance that we could never match. While our forces struggled with critical shortages of basic materials, the Americans could build entire cities of steel wherever they went. By April 1945, as the European war neared its end, the US had deployed approximately 120 Zouaves Quonset huts across global theaters. The Pacific campaign continued to require thousands more monthly, with plans for the anticipated invasion of Japan calling for an additional 75 Zouaves units. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 brought the war to an unexpected conclusion, but the need for Quonset huts didn't diminish. Instead, they found new purposes in the immediate post-war period: housing for displaced persons, administrative centers for occupation forces, and temporary facilities for war-ravaged communities. Captain Eleanor Hayes, the Army nurse who had worked in Quonset hospitals in New Guinea, found herself stationed in Tokyo during the occupation. "The Japanese are fascinated by our Quonset structures," she wrote to her sister. "Local engineers have been studying them intensely, particularly the efficiency of the design and assembly process. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Japanese versions in the future." This prediction proved accurate. The Quonset concept would influence post-war construction in many nations, with variations appearing in rebuilding efforts across Europe and Asia. The basic principles, prefabrication, modular design, and simplified assembly, became fundamental to modern construction practices. In the United States, the war's end created a new challenge: what to do with the tens of thousands of surplus Quonset huts no longer needed for military purposes. The answer came in the form of an innovative housing solution for returning veterans. At Stanford University, a Quonset village was established to house married student veterans and their families. Similar installations appeared at colleges across the country. For a nation facing a severe housing shortage, these humble steel structures provided an immediate solution. Richard Davis, a former Army sergeant who had helped assemble Quonsets in France, now found himself living in one with his wife and infant son at the University of Illinois, while pursuing his engineering degree on the GI Bill. "It's come full circle," Davis remarked to a local newspaper. "These huts helped win the war, and now they're helping us rebuild our lives afterward. They're not fancy, but they're solid and practical, just like the generation that used them." By 1948, an estimated 150 Zouaves Americans were living in repurposed Quonset huts. Rural communities purchased surplus units for schools, community centers, and churches. Entrepreneurs converted them into workshops, stores, and restaurants. The distinctive curved roof structures became a common sight across the American landscape. Peter de Jong, now retired from Fuller Construction, took a cross-country train journey in 1950 and kept a tally of the Quonset huts he spotted from his window. "I counted 212 between New York and San Francisco," he wrote to his former colleagues. Some were still in their original military configuration, but most had been adapted in creative ways I never would have imagined. Our 8-week emergency project has become a permanent part of American architecture. Indeed, the legacy of the Quonset hut extended far beyond its military origins. The principles developed for its mass production and rapid deployment influenced everything from post-war suburban housing developments to modern disaster relief structures. The emphasis on standardization, prefabrication, and ease of assembly became fundamental concepts in 20th century construction. The original engineering team never received significant public recognition for their achievement. There were no medals or ceremonies acknowledging their contribution to the war effort, yet the impact of their work was immeasurable, not just in supporting military operations, but in demonstrating the potential of American industrial capacity. In his later years, Otto Brandenburger reflected on the project that had defined his early career. The Quonset hut wasn't a sophisticated or elegant solution, he acknowledged. It was practical, economical, and exactly what was needed at that moment in history. Its beauty was in its simplicity and in how perfectly it served its purpose. Today, over 80 years after those first prototypes were assembled in Rhode Island, surviving Quonset huts can still be found, serving various functions across the world. Their curved steel silhouettes stand as monuments to wartime ingenuity and the power of practical design. Admiral Gilman's assessment in 1944 perhaps best summarizes their significance. In the history of this war, much will be written about our advanced weapons and technologies. But I believe these simple steel structures deserve equal recognition. They sheltered our forces, housed our wounded, protected our supplies, and enabled our operations in every theater of this global conflict. The humble Quonset hut may well be the most versatile weapon we deployed. The transformation of simple curved steel into globally deployed fortresses represents more than just a feat of engineering and logistics. It demonstrates how innovation often emerges from necessity, how seemingly modest designs can have profound impacts, and how the true measure of a solution lies not in its complexity, but in its effectiveness. For the men and women who served in World War II, the Quonset hut represented something deeply American, practical, unpretentious, adaptable, and produced with overwhelming abundance. These mass-produced steel shelters embodied the industrial might that ultimately helped secure Allied victory, showing that sometimes the most revolutionary military assets aren't weapons at all, but the infrastructure that supports those who wield them. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.